Keanu Reeves sat quietly in a bustling McDonald's, his casual black tee blending into the everyday crowd. A small boy nearby clutched a broken toy car, his nervous eyes darting between Keanu and a cold, imposing man in a pristine suit. But what the boy whispered next would turn Keanu pale, send him reaching for his phone, and unravel a mystery that no one saw coming. Before we dive into the full story, drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. If you love gripping tales like this, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow we've got another unforgettable story waiting for you. The night had settled over Los Angeles when Keanu Reeves pulled into a quiet McDonald's, seeking a break after a grueling day on set. Clad in a dark hoodie and a baseball cap tugged low, he slipped inside, unnoticed by the sparse late-night crowd. The place was nearly deserted, just a few lone souls scattered across the tables and employees wiping down counters in the dim glow of overhead lights. Keanu grabbed a quick meal and sank into a corner booth, exhaling the day's fatigue, ready to savor a rare moment of peace. But peace didn't last. His eyes landed on a small figure hunched in a booth across the room. A boy, no older than 5, with messy blonde hair and wide, restless eyes. Ethan, as Keanu would later learn to call him, sat alone, clutching a broken toy car with a wheel missing, its jagged edge pressed tight against his chest. No parents, no guardians, just a kid in a faded blue shirt, isolated in a sea of empty seats. Keanu frowned, unease creeping in. The boy's gaze flicked toward him repeatedly, a mix of curiosity and something heavier. Fear, maybe, etched into his small face. Ethan's hands trembled as he gripped the toy tighter, his knuckles whitening. He didn't play with it or fidget like most kids would. Instead, he held it like a lifeline, his eyes darting to the dark windows every few seconds, as if expecting something or someone to appear. Keanu shifted in his seat, the fries forgotten. Why was this kid alone? Where were his parents? The boy's isolation gnawed at him, but it was the look in Ethan's eyes that hit hardest. A silent plea, a weight no child should carry. Then, as if summoned by Keanu's stare, Ethan slid off his seat, his sneakers scuffing the floor. He hesitated, glancing back at the shadows outside, before taking timid steps toward Keanu's table. When he reached Keanu, Ethan stopped, his breath shaky. He leaned in close, voice barely a whisper. "He's out there. He told me to find you." Keanu's pulse quickened. The boy's words weren't just odd. They were a cry for help, raw and urgent, pulling Keanu straight into a problem he hadn't signed up for. The quiet hum of the McDonald's was shattered by the soft shuffle of tiny feet across the tiled floor. Keanu Reeves, still nursing his fries in the dim corner booth, looked up as Ethan, the small, nervous boy with the broken toy car, approached. The 5-year-old moved with a hesitance that belied his age, his faded blue shirt hanging loosely on his frame. His hands, trembling visibly, clutched the jagged remains of the toy car, as if it were the only thing keeping him tethered to the world. When he reached Keanu's table, he stopped, his wide eyes flicking nervously between the man before him and the dark expanse beyond the restaurant's glass walls. Then, leaning in so close that Keanu could feel the faint warmth of his breath, Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible, "He told me to find you. He's out there." Keanu froze, the words slicing through the haze of his fatigue like a jolt of electricity. His heart thudded hard against his ribs, and a chill crept up his spine, settling into a tight knot at the base of his neck. "Who?" he managed to ask, his voice low but urgent, leaning forward to catch every syllable the boy might offer. But Ethan didn't answer, Not with words, at least. He shook his head, a quick, jerky motion, his messy blonde hair falling into his eyes. Those eyes, huge and glassy, darted toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the McDonald's, staring into the pitch-black night outside. Keanu followed his gaze, squinting against the glare of the interior lights reflecting off the glass. Beyond it, there was nothing, just the faint flicker of a street lamp casting long, eerie shadows across the empty parking lot. Instinct kicked in. Keanu pushed his tray aside and slid out of the booth, standing slowly, his movements deliberate. "Who's out there, kid?" he pressed, softer this time, crouching slightly to meet Ethan's eye level. The boy's lips parted, but no sound came out. Instead, he took a step closer, pressing the broken car tighter to his chest, his small frame trembling like a leaf caught in a storm. Keanu's mind raced. Was this a lost kid spinning a wild story, or something more? The weight in Ethan's stare told him it wasn't a game. There was real fear there, raw and unfiltered, the kind that didn't come from imagination alone. He straightened up, turning fully toward the window Ethan kept fixating on. The night pressed against the glass like a heavy curtain, thick and impenetrable. Keanu stepped closer, his sneakers silent on the floor, and cupped his hands around his eyes to cut the glare. The parking lot stretched out before him, his car parked near the entrance, a dumpster hulking in the corner, and the sporadic glow of streetlights painting the asphalt in uneven patches. No movement, no figure lurking in the shadows. Just stillness, interrupted only by the occasional rustle of wind pushing a stray wrapper across the ground. Yet the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, a primal signal that something wasn't right. "Ethan," Keanu said, turning back to the boy, his tone firm but gentle. "What's he look like? Can you tell me anything?" Ethan's eyes flicked up to meet his, then dropped again, his silence louder than any scream. The boy shifted his weight, glancing over his shoulder toward the door as if expecting it to burst open at any second. Keanu followed that glance, his own unease deepening. The McDonald's felt smaller now, the walls closing in, the faint chatter of the few remaining customers fading into a distant hum. He reached into his pocket, fingers brushing his phone, debating whether to call someone, anyone, for help. But who? The police? Over a kid's cryptic whisper? Ethan took another step, closing the gap between them until he was nearly pressed against Keanu's side. His voice came again, a shaky thread of sound. "He said you'd know what to do. He's watching." Keanu's breath caught. Watching? From where? His eyes snapped back to the window, scanning harder this time, searching for any hint. A silhouette, a glint of light off a pair of eyes. Anything. The darkness stared back, unyielding. He crouched again, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder, feeling the boy flinch under his touch. "Okay, buddy," he said, forcing calm into his voice. "We'll figure this out. You're safe with me." But even as the words left his mouth, doubt gnawed at him. Safe from what? From who? The night outside held its secrets tight, and Keanu knew, deep down, that whatever Ethan had dragged him into was only just beginning. The glass door of the McDonald's swung open with a faint creak, cutting through the stillness like a knife. Keanu Reeves, still crouched beside Ethan, snapped his head toward the sound. A man stepped inside, his presence jarring against the mundane backdrop of the near-empty restaurant. Tall and lean, he wore a crisp black suit that seemed out of place for a late-night fast food stop, paired with dark sunglasses despite the hour. Keanu's stomach tightened as the stranger, Shadow, he dubbed him in his mind, paused just inside the threshold, scanning the room with a slow, deliberate sweep. Without a word, Shadow crossed the floor and slid into a booth a few tables away, his posture rigid, hands resting on the tabletop. He didn't approach the counter, didn't order a thing, just sat there, his hidden gaze locked on Keanu and the boy. Ethan shrank closer, pressing himself against Keanu's side until the sharp edge of the broken toy car dug into Keanu's leg. The boy's breath hitched, and he whispered, voice quivering, "That's him. He wants me to bring you outside." Keanu's pulse spiked, but he forced his face to stay calm, a mask honed from years of facing cameras and chaos. He glanced at Shadow, catching the faintest tilt of the man's head, as if acknowledging the boy's words. The sunglasses obscured his eyes, but the weight of his stare was unmistakable, cold, calculating, and fixed squarely on them. Keanu's hand hovered near his pocket, itching to grab his phone, but he held off, needing more before he escalated this. "Who is he, Ethan?" Keanu murmured, keeping his voice steady as he shifted to shield the boy from Shadow's line of sight. "What does he want with me?" Ethan's small frame trembled, his fingers tightening around the toy car until his knuckles blanched. "He knows who you are," the boy repeated, the words a broken record, offering no clarity, only more questions. Keanu frowned, his mind churning. "Knows who I am? An obsessed fan? A stalker?" He'd dealt with those before, but this felt different, darker, more deliberate. He stole another glance at Shadow, who hadn't moved, his hands still flat on the table, exuding an eerie patience. The air in the McDonald's thickened, the faint buzz of the overhead lights growing louder in Keanu's ears. He straightened up, keeping Ethan tucked behind him, and met Shadow's stare, or what he assumed was a stare, head on. "You okay over there?" Keanu called out, his tone casual but edged with steel, testing the waters. Shadow didn't flinch. Instead, a thin smile curled his lips, barely visible beneath the glasses, and he tilted his head again, a silent taunt. Keanu's gut twisted. This wasn't random. This guy wasn't here for a burger. He was here for them. Ethan's whisper came again, urgent now. "He said you have to come, or he'll make me." Keanu's jaw clenched. Make him! The threat hung heavy, igniting a protective spark deep in his chest. "Stay close," he told Ethan, his voice low but firm, as he weighed his options. Confront the guy. Call for help. The handful of customers, oblivious, lost in their own worlds, offered no backup, and the employees behind the counter were too far to notice the brewing storm. Shadow shifted, reaching into his jacket, and Keanu tensed, half expecting a weapon. But the man pulled out a phone, his fingers tapping the screen with quick, precise movements, never breaking his focus on them. "What's he doing?" Keanu asked, more to himself than Ethan. But the boy answered anyway, voice barely a breath. "He's telling someone. About you." Keanu's blood ran cold. Someone else was in on this? His hand finally closed around his phone, thumb hovering over the emergency dial. Shadow's smile widened, as if he sensed the move, and he leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table. "You don't want to do that, Reeves," he said, his voice smooth and low, cutting through the distance between them like a blade. "Not yet." The faint glow of Shadow's phone screen cast an eerie light across his sharp features as his fingers moved swiftly over the keys. Keanu Reeves watched, his chest tightening with every tap, the rhythmic motion amplifying the unease that had already taken root. Shadow's head remained tilted, his sunglasses reflecting the dim McDonald's lights. But Keanu could feel the man's focus, like a predator sizing up its prey, never wavering from him and Ethan. The boy clung to Keanu's side, his small body rigid. The broken toy car pressed so hard against his chest that Keanu could hear the plastic creak. The air felt charged, heavy with unspoken threats, and Keanu's hand slipped into his pocket, fingers curling around his phone. He needed to call 911 now, before whatever this was spiraled further out of control. Across the restaurant, a young employee, Mia, her name tag read, paused mid-swipe as she wiped down a counter. Her brow furrowed, her eyes darting between Keanu's tense posture and Shadow's motionless vigilance. She set the rag down, her instincts clearly picking up on the brewing storm, and started toward them, her sneakers squeaking faintly on the tiled floor. "Hey," she said, her voice soft but edged with concern as she reached Keanu's table. "Everything okay over here?" Her gaze lingered on Ethan, then flicked to Shadow, who hadn't looked up from his phone. Keanu seized the moment, leaning in just enough to keep his words from carrying. "Call the police," he murmured, his tone steady but urgent. "Quietly. Don't let him hear you." Mia's eyes widened, but she nodded, a flicker of resolve replacing her uncertainty. She turned away, pulling her own phone from her apron pocket as she retreated toward the counter, her steps quick but measured. Shadow's fingers stilled. The phone screen went dark, and he slipped it back into his jacket with a fluid, practiced motion. Then, slowly, he rose from his seat, the scrape of his chair against the floor cutting through the low hum of the restaurant. Keanu straightened, instinctively stepping in front of Ethan, his body a shield between the boy and the approaching figure. Shadow moved with a deliberate calm, his black suit absorbing the light, his sunglasses rendering his expression unreadable. He stopped a few feet from the table, close enough that Keanu could smell the faint tang of cologne, sharp, expensive, out of place in this grease-scented haven. "You shouldn't meddle in this, Reeves," Shadow said, his voice low and cold, each word dripping with menace. "Hand over the kid, and this ends nice and easy." Keanu's jaw tightened, his pulse hammering in his ears. "Not happening," he replied, his tone even but unyielding. "You want him? You tell me why." Shadow's lips twitched, a ghost of a smirk that didn't reach the rest of his face. "You don't get it, do you?" he said, tilting his head as if amused by Keanu's defiance. "This isn't your movie set. No script, no heroics. Just give me the boy." Ethan whimpered, pressing closer, his small hand gripping Keanu's hoodie. The sound lit a fire in Keanu's chest. Anger, protectiveness, a refusal to let this kid face whatever Shadow had planned alone. The restaurant seemed to shrink around them. The few remaining customers, a trucker, a teen, an old man, oblivious or too engrossed in their own worlds to notice the standoff. Mia hovered near the counter, her phone pressed to her ear, her lips moving in hushed, rapid whispers. Keanu caught her glance, a silent plea for her to hurry. Shadow followed his gaze, his smirk fading as he registered her actions. "Calling for backup?" he said, his voice dropping lower, a dangerous edge creeping in. "That's a mistake." He took a step closer, his hand brushing the edge of his jacket, and Keanu tensed, ready for anything, a gun, a knife, whatever this guy might pull. "Who are you?" Keanu demanded, stalling, buying time. "What's this kid to you?" Shadow chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "He's a job," he said simply. "And you're a complication I don't need." He reached out, his fingers outstretched toward Ethan, but Keanu moved faster, shoving the boy fully behind him and planting himself firmly in Shadow's path. "Back off," Keanu warned, his voice a low growl, years of on-screen intensity bleeding into reality. Shadow paused, his hand hovering mid-air, then dropped it, his posture shifting subtly, less casual, more coiled, like a snake ready to strike. Ethan's voice broke through, small and trembling. "He'll hurt me if I don't go." Keanu's blood ran cold, but he didn't break eye contact with Shadow. "He's not touching you," he said, more to Ethan than the man, a promise he intended to keep. Shadow's head tilted again, his glasses glinting. "Last chance, Reeves," he said, his tone flat, final. Outside, the faint wail of sirens pierced the night, growing louder, closer. Mia exhaled audibly from the counter, relief flashing across her face. Shadow's jaw tightened, and Keanu knew the clock was ticking down to something explosive. Keanu Reeves stood his ground, his broad frame a solid barrier between Ethan and the man in the black suit. Shadow's outstretched hand hung in the air, inches from the boy, but Keanu's eyes locked onto his with a steely resolve. "Not a chance," he said, his voice low and firm, cutting through the tension like a blade. "If you want him, you're going to have to explain why, right now." Ethan's small fingers dug into the fabric of Keanu's hoodie. The broken toy car pressed painfully against his hip, but Keanu didn't flinch. He could feel the boy's fear radiating, a silent plea that fueled his refusal to back down. The sirens outside were growing louder, a faint promise of help, but Keanu knew they weren't here yet, and he wasn't about to let this guy walk away with Ethan. Shadow's lips curled into a sneer, a sharp, mocking sound escaping him as he lowered his hand. "You think you're in control here, don't you?" he said, his voice dripping with disdain. He tilted his head, the sunglasses glinting under the fluorescent lights, obscuring whatever emotion might have flickered in his eyes. "The kid's a key," he continued, his tone shifting to something colder, more deliberate. "Something you couldn't possibly wrap your head around, actor." The word landed like an insult, laced with contempt, as if Keanu's life of scripts and spotlights disqualified him from understanding whatever dark game was unfolding. Keanu's brow furrowed, his mind racing to piece it together. A key? To what? But Shadow offered no more, just that cryptic taunt, dangling the truth just out of reach. Ethan whimpered, his grip tightening, and Keanu's resolve hardened. "Try me," he shot back, his voice steady despite the uncertainty gnawing at him. "What's he a key to? And why me?" Shadow chuckled again, a dry, hollow sound that sent a shiver down Keanu's spine. "You'll find out," he said, "but not like this." Without warning, Shadow lunged, his hand darting toward Ethan's arm with a speed that caught Keanu off guard. The boy yelped, stumbling backward, but Keanu reacted instinctively, shoving Ethan fully behind him and grabbing Shadow's wrist mid-motion. The man's skin was cold, his grip iron strong, and for a moment, they stood locked in a silent struggle, muscle against muscle, wills clashing in the dim light of the McDonald's. "Let him go," Keanu growled, twisting Shadow's arm downward, forcing him to stagger. But Shadow didn't relent. With a quick pivot, he yanked free and reached again, this time snagging the edge of Ethan's sleeve. The boy cried out, a sharp, desperate sound that pierced the air, and Keanu surged forward, slamming his shoulder into Shadow's chest. The impact sent Shadow reeling back a step, his sunglasses slipping slightly to reveal a flash of something, anger maybe or surprise, before he adjusted them with a flick of his hand. Ethan scrambled behind Keanu, sobbing now, the toy car clattering to the floor in the chaos. The scuffle jolted the restaurant awake. The trucker at the corner table looked up from his coffee, his grizzled face creasing with confusion. The teenage girl dropped her phone mid-scroll, her jaw slack as she stared. Even the old man with his fries paused, fork halfway to his mouth, eyes wide behind thick glasses. "What the hell's going on?" the trucker muttered, half standing, but he didn't move closer. None of them did. Mia, still at the counter, clutched her phone tighter, her voice rising as she spoke into it. "Yeah, hurry! He's trying to take the kid!" The sirens outside swelled, closer now, their wail cutting through the night. But Shadow didn't flinch. His focus remained razor-sharp, fixed on Ethan. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," Shadow hissed, straightening his jacket with a calm that felt unnerving after the violence of the moment. He stepped forward again, undeterred, but Keanu planted himself firmly, hands clenched into fists. "Back off," he warned, his voice a low rumble, every inch of him radiating a quiet fury. "You're not taking him anywhere." Shadow paused, his head tilting as if weighing his next move. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he reached into his jacket again. Not for the phone this time, but something bulkier, heavier. Keanu's breath caught, his body tensing for a fight, but Shadow only smirked, pulling his hand back empty, a deliberate tease. "Brave," Shadow said, his tone mocking, "but bravery won't save you, or him." He nodded toward Ethan, who was crouched behind Keanu, tears streaking his face as he fumbled for the fallen toy car. The sirens were deafening now, lights flashing red and blue through the windows, bathing the scene in a surreal glow. Shadow's smirk faded, his posture stiffening as he glanced toward the door. "This isn't over," he muttered, his voice a promise of something darker to come. Keanu held his ground, heart pounding, knowing the real battle was just beginning. The wail of sirens crescendoed into a piercing roar as red and blue lights flooded the McDonald's, casting jagged shadows across the tiled floor. Keanu Reeves stood firm, his body still shielding Ethan as the glass doors burst open. Two uniformed officers stormed in, their hands hovering near their holsters, eyes scanning the chaotic scene. Shadow froze mid-step, his hand still lingering near his jacket, but the sight of the police halted whatever move he'd planned. "Hands where we can see them!" the taller officer barked, his voice sharp and commanding. Shadow complied, raising his arms slowly, his smirk replaced by a tight, unreadable expression. The second officer, a woman with a stern jaw, moved swiftly, pinning his wrists and snapping handcuffs into place with a metallic click. "Check his pockets," Keanu said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. The taller officer nodded, patting Shadow down as Mia hovered near the counter, her phone still clutched tight. From an inner jacket pocket, the officer pulled a small black USB drive, its surface sleek and unmarked. He held it up, frowning. "What's this?" he demanded, but Shadow only stared ahead, silent. The officer slipped it into an evidence bag, muttering about needing tech to crack it. Keanu's gaze shifted to Ethan, who'd slumped against the booth, his small frame shaking as tears spilled down his cheeks. "It's okay now," Keanu said softly, crouching beside him, but the boy's sobs only deepened. "He's not bad," Ethan choked out, his voice trembling as he clutched the broken toy car. "He told me to find you, to save my mom, but she's not real." Keanu blinked, confusion washing over him. "What do you mean, not real?" he asked, his hand resting gently on Ethan's shoulder. The boy's tear-streaked face turned up to meet his, eyes wide and hollow. "I'm not human," he whispered, the words fragile, shattering. I'm something he made. Keanu's breath caught, his mind reeling as he tried to process the impossible confession. Ethan, a machine? The weight of it hit him like a punch, leaving him staring at the boy in stunned silence. Outside, Shadow struggled as the officers shoved him into the back of a patrol car, his composure cracking. "Reeves!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the night as the door slammed shut behind him. "You've ruined everything. That kid's an AI, a living prototype, XAI's secret project." Keanu stepped out into the cool air, the words echoing in his skull as he watched the car's lights flare. "He was programmed to find you," Shadow yelled, his face pressed against the window. "Because of that damn science fiction film you did with them." The car pulled away, tires crunching gravel, leaving Keanu rooted to the spot, the pieces snapping into place. XAI, he'd worked with them years ago, consulting on a futuristic movie about artificial intelligence. Had they used him as a marker, a beacon for this creation? Ethan emerged from the McDonald's, flanked by the female officer, his small hand still gripping the toy car. Up close, Keanu searched his face, the tear tracks, the trembling lips, and saw nothing mechanical, nothing artificial. Yet the truth gnawed at him. This wasn't a boy, not in the way he'd thought. Ethan's eyes met his, a flicker of something, gratitude maybe, or resignation, before the officer guided him into another cruiser. Keanu didn't move, didn't speak, just watched as the vehicle rolled away, taking Ethan and Shadow into the night. The USB, the coding, the purpose, it would all unravel soon. But not for him. His part was done. The McDonald's grew quiet behind him, its golden glow spilling onto the asphalt where he stood alone. Keanu tilted his head back, staring at the starless LA sky, 1,000 questions swirling in his mind. Where did humanity end and machinery begin? Ethan had felt fear, shed tears. Were those programmed or something more? He'd fought to protect a soul, only to learn it was circuits and code. The irony stung, a bitter twist to a night he'd never forget. With a slow exhale, he turned away, the crunch of his footsteps fading into the darkness, leaving the boundary between man and machine a riddle he couldn't solve. From Keanu's encounter with Ethan, we learn that compassion can bridge even the unknown. He saw a child in distress and acted, unaware Ethan was an AI. This reminds us, humanity isn't defined by flesh or code, but by empathy and courage. In a world blurring lines between man and machine, the truest strength lies in caring without judgment, protecting the vulnerable, questioning the shadows. Life's mysteries may surprise us, but kindness endures. What do you think? Where does humanity begin? Drop a comment below with your thoughts and subscribe for more stories that spark reflection.